I'm here at the Rio Las Vegas for Dice Tower West board game convention. We're going to get some interviews with some board game designers so we can ask them about their creative process and what makes a board game fun.
One person reached out to me, and another person I saw on social media used one of my games to propose to their partner.
Well, I did have a game break the top 10 in Board Game Geek, so that was awesome.
The perception of fairness is more important than actual fairness.
I'm Scott Rogers, and I'm a game designer.
Good. So I'm James Fazio, and I'm the designer of Regency.
My name is Brandt Brinkerhoff. I'm a professional graphic designer and creative director.
John D Clair, Space Base, Mystic Vale, Ready Set Bet, Dead Reckoning, Cubitos, and a handful of others.
Okay, my name is Ammon Anderson. Gnome Hollow is a tile placement, worker placement game with like some action selection and a little bit of like group engine building.
My name is Stephen Ehrensperger, and my latest game is a fishing game.
The most current released game that I helped design is called Marvel Villainous Twisted Ambition. It is a game in which you play one of three Marvel supervillains, and the one that I personally designed or helped design is Dr. Octopus.
Regency. It's a civilization-themed set collection game where players take on the roles of regents, representing history's greatest rulers and attempting to attract citizens to build a domain.
Oros is a plate tectonic themed game where you're a demigod and you have control over the land, and so you're moving and shifting the land around inside this big shared environment. You can collide land together. As the land collides, it gets bigger and bigger. It'll form volcanoes. You can erupt volcanoes. It's trying to build up the civilization while the land is literally moving underneath their feet.
The other game that's coming out is based on the 1974 movie, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And it is a cooperative horror game in which you have to essentially find the gas and the keys to your van so you can get the hell out of there before Leatherface comes and carves you up with a chainsaw.
My latest, probably hot game is Ready Set Bet. And Ready Set Bet is a horse racing game where you are the bettor and not the jockey or you don't own the horse. Your goal is to make as much money as possible betting on the outcome of the horse race. It's real time, and there's a lot of shouting. And it plays a big group. It's a party game for gamers. There's a lot of noise.
Everything is designed where like everything that helps you helps someone else. And that's an okay thing. It's a Zen game where everyone is like kind of helping everyone else, but also helping himself, which is a great way to look at life.
I always loved creating things, making things that don't exist. Designing a game is fun and games, right? It's so much fun. And I think that's why there's a lot of enthusiasts that get into game design, even if what they're making is like fully derivative and it's just the exact same, some other game they've played with like one little twist on it. It's still fun to do, right? To think in creative ways because it's a creative challenge. And I think that like people are hungry for creative outlets.
When I played Battlestar Galactica for the first time, it took me through such an experience. It has a hidden traitor, mechanic, simulated the drama, the are you a Cylon? I'm not a Cylon, kind of thing. The looking for who's creating havoc here at the table, but not knowing, and just perfectly captured that. It's like I entered into the show and experienced it. I never imagined that a board game could take me on that kind of a ride. I'm like, man, I'm in.
I want them to experience an emotion, usually. But I'm still working on that. As a creator, I still feel like I have a long way to go. I haven't made a board game that makes somebody cry, or a board game that makes somebody terrified. I have made games that have made people nervous or tense. I'm not even 100% sure you can scare somebody in a board game, but I would love to try to make that happen.
I always had this daydream about stumbling across a table full of people I've never met before, all sitting around having a great time playing a game I designed. They don't know me, I don't know them, and they're just sitting around a table just having a great time playing something I created. And now that's happened multiple times, and it doesn't stop feeling good. It's hard to say that's the best moment, because there's so many good things about designing games, but that's a highlight for sure.
The best part about designing a board game is seeing somebody have a great time and just elated over it and says, oh, this is best game I played, or that was so much fun. You just see them having real joy and experiencing it. That is very satisfying.
When you're playing a game, you have these like satisfying moments. At the end of the game, even if you lost, you talk about that like satisfying moment. When you're designing a game, it's like that times like 50 or 100.
Well, the best part is going through the design process and thinking of new ways to improve the game and fix it and make it work better. Oh, I have a solution. It didn't work. I have a solution. It didn't work. I have a.
Like when you fix a mechanic and it starts to work, and then you see other people having like those like aha moments, it's like an indescribable feeling, almost like intoxicating in a way. It's way harder than playing a game, but like anything in life, like the amount of effort put into it translates into a reward.
If anything, I hope people play my game, have a fun time, share them with people they love and care about, and strangers, and expand their relationships with people they already care about, make new relationships, and if my games are part of like meaningful life moment, that's awesome. One person reached out to me, and another person I saw on social media used one of my games to propose to their partner, right? And that's just so cool, right? That's so cool that something I created was just at a small moment in one of the most important moments in someone else's life. Just awesome.
My newest game is Burn the Witch, which is a social deduction game. Plays like Mafia or Werewolf, but without all the problems and kinks involved in that kind of game.
And this is where a lot of good ideas can come from for a game designer is you play something, you're dissatisfied with it, so then you go, I think I could do a better job. Or maybe if this were not quite the way this was, that might make it a totally different game.
The game underneath the mechanics that are running, like the map, is all plate tectonics and geography, right? And so there's a lot of science baked in there.
I did a lot of research because when I make any sort of licensed game, for me as a fan of things, it's very important to see that the things that I love about the game are represented well in the gameplay as well as the visuals and just the whole package.
I've had geologists come up to me and like shake my hand and say thank you, because the geology is accurate.
Right? Like if you're a Texas Chainsaw Massacre fan and you buy a Texas Chainsaw Massacre game, well, it damn well better be faithful to that movie.
But I find like regular life is in some ways much more interesting as far as like an everyday topic. And so I'll give you an example. I was a finalist for the Ion Award this year, and in the strategy category, but in the simple games category, the guy who won, he had a game about like filling up a globe of like a bubblegum machine. And so like my wife saw that and she goes, I love that idea. Like, and so you got points based on whether if you had like a bunch of green balls like next to each other, right? So your points were there as you're like drafting balls of bubblegum. And so like that theme is such an interesting thing. And we were all kids at one point. We were all like wanting to go to put a quarter in a bubblegum machine, right? So I think ideas for games are everywhere.
So Ready Set Bet, the original concept was an idea, silly little dice thing I used to do as a kid. I would roll 2d6 and just see what number I'd rolled the most. And like 7's the most common, but sometimes I would roll more 9s than 7's after 50 rolls, right? And I would have a running commentary in my head. I used to watch a lot of sports in my head when I was a kid, so I would have this running commentary in my head. And like the 9 is outpacing the 7, right? And the favorite to win. The underdog, here it comes, right? And the 7's gaining, right? The question for me was, how do I turn a exercise in essentially 0-player exercise of rolling dice and seeing what you roll the most often into an interesting game? Real time was what I thought of. If that is happening in real time, that dice rolling, just moving, that players have no control, is happening in real time, but players are able to make choices upon what potential outcomes are going to happen. That would create tension and excitement of this thing that you're watching that is somewhat interesting to watch.
I mean, a good idea can come from anywhere. And so I am a big believer in getting as many outside influences as possible. I play as many games as I can. I read as many things as I can. I watch as many films and try to experience as many things in the real world as I can. But I find that some of my better ideas come from when I misinterpret things. So, for example, I'll go on to Board Game Geek and I will start thumbing through just images of random games that I might have never played before. And then I kind of imagine what type of game it is without reading the rules. And then I'll go back and watch a video or read the rules and I'll go, oh, I got that completely wrong. But I go, ooh, but maybe there's a game that doesn't exist yet that I could use to those misinterpretations from.
Bicycle playing cards and a Sharpie, because when you're using normal cards. And then for Burn the Witch, I got some little tokens, and my daughter actually created a little ballot box for me to just say, here, we can use this to vote.
So the very first prototypes were all drawn with a Sharpie on a pizza box, because that's what I had. And so, like when you first have an idea, you're like, okay, I just need like something to like interact with, right? And so I took the bottom half of a pizza box and I cut it up into tiles, and I just drew on those as little tiles. Took the top half and I drew a big old map and stuff like this on it, and then just sheets of paper, and literally just like cut them down to little rectangles and just drew on them, with a pen, like this is what's going to happen, just to have something that I could play on.
For initial prototyping, I'll use Lego bits or even cereal bits to start moving things around on a sketch of paper, if that starts getting my mind moving in the direction of how I want that game to work. Just start making some cards, draw a board, use the inside of a cereal box and start sketching it out.
And then I would sit in my living room floor, on the floor, and I'd play the first player and I'd move to the next seat. So my orientation would change, right? And I'd play the next player and the next player and the next player, and I would play through full games over and over and over and over and over again. Because as you play through, sometimes it takes 2 or 3 turns, and you're like, wow, this isn't working. What am I going to do to fix it, right? And then you can change rules on the fly, and you're like, okay, now we're going to keep playing. Until I got to a point where that little cardboard thing, it was working, and it was kind of a game.
My friends laugh at my prototypes because they look like finished board games. We were playing my prototype actually at SaltCon, and people were laughing. They're like, ooh, what's this game? Where do I get it? And I'm like, oh, I made this in my basement. And so as an illustrator, I tend to way over prototype. I use 3D printer to like prototype pieces. I use a Cricut to cut out like stickers to like add final art onto my 3D pieces. I use a laser cutter for that friend of mine owns to cut out like high-end versions of a prototype.
You really want to make it out of whatever best communicates your game design. So if you have things that have complicated mechanisms, like some games have, towers and Zolkin has that spinning wheel and things like that. Really, you should try to build those things. When you are at a point where you're ready to present your game, particularly to other players or to, more importantly, a publisher, you want to put your best foot forward.
If you'll take time to make a good prototype, you'll find that playtesters are way more willing to come to the table. You are far more likely to get people showing up at your table, wanting to play your game, and give you really good feedback.
It didn't take long for me to say, okay, like if we're going to ask people to play this, we also have to think about the user experience for the playtesters, right? So it's not just the final user experience of the people purchasing the game. If you want playtesters to play your game a second time, you've got to give them a good experience. And so I did like really rudimentary just illustrations, printed those out onto like bookboard type sheets and cut those down so it actually looked much more like a finished game, or at least closer to like something that was visually interesting to interact with. And then I moved it online to go digital, because in the digital environment, you could play over and over and over again. You can make changes on the fly, far fewer production costs. I put Oros on Tabletopia, and mainly because I wanted to be able to play test with people who are not online gamers, right? And so it's an open platform that you can invite anybody in, right? And they didn't have to have Steam or Tabletop Simulator to make it work.
I also feel that, particularly if I'm making a game that is thematic or has a certain story to tell or something like that, I want to do whatever I can to help get you into the mood of that narrative that I'm trying to make. One of my tricks is I use what is called a component of quality, which means when I'm building a prototype, I have one thing in that prototype that is of a level of quality that I want to see in the final game. So let's say when I was making Alien Fate of the Nostromo, the one component of quality I had was I bought a miniature of the alien that my kids ended up calling Alan, and he was my touchstone. As we were playing, Alan would remind me of my game is eventually going to have something that is like this in it. It also helps the playtesters and the other people, the publisher, if you're pitching it to a publisher, start to, all right, because of this thing, it will help me imagine more of what the final product will be like.
Generally speaking, I buy these 1 foot by 1 foot cardboard things, and they're just blank 1 foot one. You get them in 25 sheets at a time. I get them on Amazon or Walmart.com or something, right? Order those. You get them in black and white. Sticky on one side. You print on that. Stick it onto the cardboard, and then I've got these. My wife actually is a great seamstress, and she makes costumes, and she went to school for that. And she had fabric cutting scissors, which are these long handled scissors, right, with these big scissor blades at the top, and they cut right through that cardboard. So I stick it onto the cardboard, and that just pops out tokens, no problem. So all tokens and player boards I put onto that, and that is good for. And then I put on cardstock for cards.
I hop into Illustrator and I start crafting at least like a first pass of what I want my icons to be.
One of the game systems I'm most known for is card crafting, which is the idea of using card sleeves as an actually essential component to a game, and multiple cards in the same sleeve combine to make one unique, different card. So the idea for card crafting came from asking myself the question, what is something that's never been done before? And could it be a cool game? The ideation process I used was, let me think of a game components. Are there ways that they've never even used before that could be used differently? And I went through like the game box. Could you use the game box in a way that's never been used? A dice tower. And then when I thought of card sleeves, I couldn't think of any game that used card sleeves in a way that actually was required for the game. People use it to protect their cards. And then I was like, card sleeves. How could you use card sleeves? So card crafting, that's its own unique prototyping problem because the cards are transparent. So an individual card, you need to. I get these 1 foot by 1 foot transparent sheets, big sheets, and then it's a bit of a nightmare. Though now that I'm making card crafting games, the publisher I work with, AEG, actually just sends me pre-cut cards, which is way easier now. But when I was first making them, I had these big sheets. I'd have pen in on the card sheets, then cut them out, and I have to like hold them out to a light to cut along the lines because I couldn't see. And then I have the card, and then I have all these blank cards. So then I have to print on sticker sheets, cut out the stickers, stick them onto the cards, so you'd have a mostly transparent cards with like one sticker modification.
I have shelves full. I have a box of shame that is filled with failed. So there's certain designs. Now, here's some advice to a new board game designer. Never throw away your prototype. My biggest regret in life was a prototype that I threw away because this was right when the collectible card game, like Magic and all that was coming out, and it was very hot, and so I was playing a lot of that. And I was like, "Oh, there's not a game that is based on the Western genre. I really love, cowboys and gunfights and all that good stuff." And so I designed a card game to be played, and it worked really well. And I play tested it with my friends. Everyone was like, "Yeah, this is really cool." And I was like, "Well, what should I do with it next?" Because I hadn't really. This was before I was a professional board game designer, so I didn't really have the knowledge or the connections or what to do with it. And so it kind of sat for a little bit. And then another published game came out that was cowboy themed, but slightly different, but still Western themed. But they had a mechanic in it that they resolved combat with poker hands, which was something I didn't do in my game. And I was so pissed off with myself that I didn't think of that because I'm like, oh my God, poker and cowboys, of course. Well, how did I miss this? And I got so mad, I threw out my prototype and I threw out all my rules and everything to do with it because I was just so furious at myself because I'd missed this obvious thing. And then about 3 months later, I went, why did I do that? I had a fully designed game that just because one game exists doesn't mean my game is invalid because my game is still different enough from the other game. And then I tried to recreate it, But because I had no notes and your memory is a squishy thing, I never could quite capture what I had created. And I literally pursued it for 10 years. It was never as good as that original thing. And so to this day, I'm like, oh, why did I throw out that prototype? So never throw out your prototypes.
Boros took, I've been working on it for about 7 years total, but the game development took about 4.5 to 5 years. So many times, like, okay, try this, fail. Try that, fail. Try that, right? Oh, the game just went for 5.5 hours. Okay, try that, fail. Someone would show up and they'd break the thing, right? They'd just play the game in a completely different way than anybody else has ever attempted to play it. And, you discover, okay, wow, that's broken.
In the process of getting from an idea to a final game, there are many failed games along the way. You play test and you're like, okay, there was something in there that was decent. Like, that's the most common alpha playtest for me. Okay, the idea I thought was good is good, but the game I put around it was okay. And then when you make that one change, that click, okay, oh, I solved the problem. Now I've got a good game on my hands. Now how do I make it great?
What does the game want? Not what do I want? Because I might have an idea in my head, but it's not the right thing. One of the biggest problems through playtesting Gnome Hollow is that everybody was trying to play my game like Carcassonne. My game is not Carcassonne. And if you play like Carcassonne, you're going to lose. I had to build rule sets that mitigated people wanting to play that way.
There's always this heart. There's like the heart of the game, and it was this interactive space in the middle that was in motion, right? And that's what when people would see it, they were enamored with it. They're like, "There's something magical here." That's what really was magic to me. But then figuring out, okay, well, how do you turn that thing that's the heart into a game that is elegant and streamlined and understandable and fun? On top of all of that, right?
We all like to be critical. I mean, every one of us, if asked our opinion, will say the games we hate and the games we love. And we're going to be brutally honest. And every single one of those games that we say we hate, somebody was behind that game, from creation to design to everything, right? I mean, you can't take it personal, especially when you realize that your game isn't for everyone. You really need to know getting in front of the right audience, getting into the hands of the people who really care.
I jokingly say the only other profession that constantly gets negative feedback is a stand-up comedian. Other than a game designer. I've been told, hey, your game sucks and this is no good and blah, blah, blah. Now, obviously, those people need better communication skills, but it's okay. I know how to deal with it.
If you're not used to that, it can be really difficult when, you've created a darling and then people tell you that your darling is awful and ugly and horrible and it's not working and you have to kill it. You have to kill your darling to make the game better. And that's a really hard thing to hear, and it's a hard thing to process. It's hard to hear criticism and know what to do with it in ways that it doesn't dilute the heart of the game, but also adds to the elegance of the game.
You don't have to listen to everybody's advice, and not everybody is right. Everybody goes into making board games being very optimistic that I'm going to make this great game. Everybody's going to love it. It's going to get great reviews. It's going to sell a ton on Kickstarter. And invariably, almost none of them do.
Well, I read a comment on BGG, and this one actually made me laugh because it was so out there, right? I read a comment on BGG about Ready Set Bet. This game is completely lacking fun and intellectually dull. If that is true for you, then it is true for you, 100%. Very often, the most useful thing you get out of a playtest isn't what your playtesters tell you. It's being able to read into why they're telling you what they're telling you. As playtesters will often give you suggestions, and as often as not, their suggestions are not good. But they're speaking to something that is real. If they're saying, the game ended too soon, I wanted to do more, that doesn't mean your game should be longer. It might mean that you just need to give them a faster jump start at the beginning so they get to that cool stuff before the game is over.
Don't take it personally, because nobody's talking about you. They're just talking about the game, right? And everybody is interested in making that game better. And also, not every game's for everybody.
There was a mechanic in Gnome Hollow that I loved. It was a rain mechanic where rain drove the growth of mushrooms, and I loved it. And it threw all my balance off. And I didn't listen to that for a long time, and I think I knew it up here that it was throwing my balance off. But I loved this idea. the minute I pulled it out, the game worked.
I had another design which was a mining game, and I thought it was important that I wanted to bring the mines down. I didn't want them all to be available at once. I wanted there to be a build and a progression for the game. So it seemed important that people basically spend money to bring one of the mines to be available for people to play in. And so there was an economy that would slightly punish the leading player because they would be the ones who are bringing things online and expanding the market for the rest of the players. Well, the game, I couldn't get that game to play in under an hour, but I finally just killed the economy, forcing you to buy a mine to bring it in. I just was like, okay, every new round we'll just bring one in. No one has to pay for it, it's just there. And then suddenly the game is playing under an hour, it's flowing much better. I cut out a third of the pieces I needed. If you can let go of some of your, what you think are key mechanics in a product, and what's amazing is how often it is the economy that you thought was valuable when you started, and then the game just magically works.
A good approach is to take feedback and then to say, okay, I got the feedback, and usually people operate way up here, like at the top level, because they're interacting with at a surface level, but you're working at like a deeper level where like mechanics are at play or where like systems are at play. So if somebody is saying something like, hey, I didn't like this, or hey, I felt bad when this happened, or hey, this wasn't fun, what are they really trying to say? Or like, where was the moment that it wasn't fun? Or where was it that it was frustrating? Because that's going to start pointing you to the root of what they're saying, right? Because there's actually a cause, and that cause is usually so far below the surface that the players, they don't really know what's causing it. They just know that it's happening and they're feeling something, right? And so they're going to give you solutions, but they're all going to be surface level solutions.
Start early and playtest, 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 playtest. Don't, when your idea is rough, if you can, start explaining your idea to someone else.
I ask people to express how they're feeling during moments of the game. If you focus people on what they're feeling as they're playing a game, and I usually ask people to just like speak out loud, like, I'm upset right now because they took that and I didn't get to do my thing, or I'm bored. I actually would love to stop playing this game if I could step away. Like I want people to just say those things out loud, even if they don't step away, just to say, I'm angry right now, or I am so checked out because this game is just not engaging me.
Two kinds of feedback. You're going to get feedback from your family, and they're going to be like, I love this. I love everything you've made. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen. You're so genius. And you're like, yay, everyone likes my game. And then you play with regular people, and they're like, bro, this is trash. Play with people who will be really honest with you. And then when a person tells you something they don't like, you should listen to it.
Your friends, your family, they're rooting for you, and they're probably not going to share a real harsh criticism. But if you can see somebody else come up to the game, open up the game, play the game, and just be genuinely elated about their experience, if you weren't in the room or they don't know you're the creator, that's when you know you've done the right thing.
So I think it's really easy to say, okay, well, we've got a game group, we'll play test with them, it's working with them, it's done, right? We got like 6 people playing it, but it works every time. And it's just not enough, right? You have to have like 100 people play it, or hundreds of people play it.
Mm-hmm.
You need people playing it who you're not there when they play it, and all they have is a rule book, right? And then they're giving feedback back to you.
The more people you play with, that's when you start to finally see what you've created. I know it's fun when I find that the feedback has changed during playtests. So I have a survey I send out after they play the game, and they can say, was it fun? And then like on a scale of 1 to 10, how fun was the game? I want to know, like, was this a 6 for you? Or was this a 7 for you? Or was this a 10 for you? When the feedback begins to generally change as a whole, I will go back to the people who had really not felt like it was fun, say, hey, why don't you give this another try? I think you're going to think it's more fun.
There's going to be a point where you lose objectivity completely. And I call it, you get what I call designer blinders. And so now you're wearing these these blinders on your head, and you can only see the way that the game needs to be played, or the way you think the game needs to be played.
If your game is super balanced, that might make it not fun. Many times you want a game to end a little bit precipitously, and you don't want confusion about who won. You want a winner. And so when you play test with the public and the response is more like, where can I buy this? You're done.
I'm going to say 3 barometers. If it's fun for me, that's 1. If I'm not enjoying it, it's not fun yet. The second one is, depending on the game, if it's a very cerebral game, sometimes you can't tell if the players are having a good time. But if they're pulling out their phones, that's a sign they're not enjoying it as much. Also, if you know the people you're playing with, sometimes people are just more phone people, and factoring that in, right? And you're like, he's on his phone even when he's playing a game he really loves. Often, like, how often they look at their phone and pull it out while playing is a gauge of whether they're enjoying it. That's true of strategy games, when they're sitting there thinking and they're not visibly having fun. If it's a party game or a exciting game, it's pretty easy to tell if people are having a good time or not. And then the third barometer is, if my wife likes it, it means it's got a good chance of being a good game. If she doesn't, then I have to say, is it her type of game anyway? If I think it's her type of game and she doesn't like it, it means I need to change it, right? And if it is her type of game and she likes it, those are all my games that have been hits.
For an indie game developer, the most surprising thing is you just have no idea how many hats you'll have to wear.
If you're going to do it yourself, you have to have this massive skill set to make that possible.
The game has to have art, so you need to have really good art or be able to work with really good artists who can do that and be able to communicate to them what you want.
And there are graphic designers, and there are videographers and marketing specialists. But there's also all sorts of production specialists, right? Like understanding how manufacturing works, how printing works.
You've got the game's got to travel overseas, so then there's the freight.
Once you have a product, now you're running a business. How are you going to sell it?
If you're doing Kickstarter, my goodness, that's a business unto itself. I mean, you don't even want to. Kickstarter is such an effort, because now you've got to develop a Kickstarter page and you've got to do the whole campaign thing.
And so you'll often see very small teams that are making all of those things happen.
It's the reason why you've got companies that are just doing that now. And so partnering with the right people, I think, is very important for longevity.
I would say go on to Amazon.com, look up Your Turn, The Guide to Great Tabletop Game Design, which is a book I wrote, which is a book that will teach you how to design 6 original board games. And you also learn about how to sell your game and how to kickstart it and how to talk to publishers and contracts and all the business part of it as well, because that's a super important thing for game designers to learn. That took me a long time to learn. But now, because I'm older and I've learned a lot of things, I am sharing that with you so you can just jump right to the middle of the line rather than be in the back.
When you take an idea and you try to make it into something that is functional, or try to make it into something that exists, your idea isn't going to work, right? Like it just won't work, because there's constraints of reality as you start to add in what it's going to take to do it. And as you start playing it, you'll start realizing your idea was the start. It was the germ. It was the seed, right? But a seed's not the tree.
If you're talking to new designers, a lot of time, a common question you'll get is, how do you protect your games from getting stolen or something like that? And I think they're often surprised to hear that, and you'll hear this from most designers. They don't worry about it. Ideas are cheap. I have way more ideas than I have time to work on. Time to execute and turn that idea into a good game, right? It's rare that a good idea just translates 1-to-1 into a good game. It's so easy to have a good idea. It's terribly difficult to make that idea a game that people want to play, that's good, that stands out. And as a new designer, worrying about that is just going to stop you from succeeding, I think.
The reason I think people are encouraged to make card games first is because the manufacturing of a card game is pretty low budget, but ultimately it's really hard to build an audience for like a party game or a card game.
When I was first designing games, my alpha playtests were often unplayably bad. Don't hold yourself to the standard that your first idea and your first attempt at making that idea into a game will turn into a good game, because it probably won't.
Sometimes there's this gap in imagination between the player and the designer, and the bigger that gap is, the harder sometimes it is for players to get into that mood of the game. And theme helps with gameplay. A lot of ideas can be used as a shortcut through theme, and if you have that theme kind of helping you do that heavy lifting, then they're able to very quickly connect the dots rather than go, well, wait, I don't quite get this. Why is this doing that thing? It doesn't make sense. But if it's like, look, the mailman brings the letter and puts it in your mailbox, you're going to be like, oh, okay, I understand why the letter ends up in my mailbox.
Spend, maybe once a week or something, a time where, okay, now I'm going to sit down and I'm going to implement or put on paper those things that I'd thought during the week. And
If I'm not making a prototype physically at the time and I'm trying to think, dim the lights, I like working at night, I try to turn off the internet, right? I've attempted to extricate social media from my life as much as possible. Often one of the best ways I find to help me solve a problem in a game design is stop thinking about it, just go play other games. The way that game is doing that is really clever. It doesn't directly I can't just solve my problem, but it's like, right, that I could do it like that, and then, fit that into this other thing, and that might help.
I have a whiteboard, and it's in my studio. It's right behind my desk, and it says 3 things. It says, number 1, my game should be beautiful. Number 2, my game should play as elegantly as it is beautiful. And number 3, it should be fun.
So here's the thing. If you want to be a game designer, I'm talking right to the camera here. If you out there want to be a game designer, there's only one thing you need to do, and that is make and finish a game. That's it. Once you've made that game, you're a game designer.